Hi, my name's Chloe and welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a bezel cup for your stones. But first I think we need to clean this studio up a little bit. So let's get started with that and then we'll get into the fun stuff. Okay, that's much better. So my studio is also in my garage. So when the garage and my studio get a little bit too cluttered, it just is really hard for my brain to work. So let's get started with the bezel cup and I will show you how I do it. So the materials that I'm going to be using for today's project are my bench pin, my saw. I also will be using saw blades for my saw. I'll be using this Sharpie briefly. I will be using hard and medium solder. And then of course my stone that I'm going to make the bezel cup for. My Joyce Chen scissors, these are incredible for metalsmiths out there. I will be using some fine silver bezel wire. I also will be using my soldering board and my butane torch. I will be using some flux. And I will be using some 22 gauge sterling silver sheet. The first step is going to be taking your stone and your bezel wire and making sure that the bezel wire is high enough to fold itself over the stone a little bit once you're done setting it. So I do have some shorter bezel wires, but unfortunately they weren't quite tall enough to cover the stone for the setting. So this one is going to do for this. I would also recommend, especially if you're just starting out with metalsmithing, that you make sure you get fine silver bezel wire and not sterling silver bezel wire. It's a little bit softer and easier to work with. I made the mistake of starting with sterling silver bezel wire and it was just a little bit too tricky for me at the time to work with. So then you're going to fold your bezel wire around your stone and make sure that it's touching right here, and then I just mark with a Sharpie about where I want to cut. So once I have it cut, I'll fold it around the stone and see how much excess I have. Right here you can see I really don't have a lot, so I'm just going to make sure that my edges are even, and as long as they are, then I'm going to start soldering it together. If not, you can use a file or very carefully with your scissors to make sure that the lines are straight up and down and parallel to each other. So now you can flux your piece. I use this liquid flux. You do need to use a decent amount of it. Let's see, that's not a great angle, but I use this Fire Scoff liquid flux. There's many different types of flux you can use. I would just recommend trying out a few different ones and seeing what works best for you in your practice and going from there. And then this right here is a piece of hard solder. I'm using wire solder. And then you just have to really carefully heat your piece. You don't want to melt the bezel wire. The solder will actually flow where you're pointing your flame. So if you want your solder to flow up, like I do here, then I kind of want to get this piece right at the top heated. But you do need to heat the whole piece evenly. There we go. So it flowed, and then you just want to check your seam. So I can see here that my seam, my solder has flowed throughout the entire seam on the inside and the outside, all the way from the top to the bottom. After this, you're going to want to put your piece in your pickle pot, and then we need to sand the edges to make sure that it's nice and flat and even. So here I have some 120 grit sandpaper, and we really just need to sand this in a figure 8 formation to make sure that the bottom of the piece is flat before we attach it to the back plate. Sanding is my least favorite part of the process, so I will spare you the details, but the most important part is making sure that there are no gaps in between where the back plate and the bezel will connect with each other. Okay, so I have a nice, clean, and flat bezel, and now I'm going to take the bezel and put it on my sterling silver sheet to measure out how much I need. So this one I'm going to do just a nice clean bezel, and I want to try and minimize as much silver waste as possible because silver ain't cheap these days. And then I'm going to take my saw blade and my saw, and I'm going to saw out this back plate for my piece. I use nano blades from Pepe Tools, and I love them. They seem to last quite a bit longer than my other cheaper saw blades that I was using before. So here is my 22 gauge back plate, and then I have to solder the bezel to the back plate. For this one, I'm going to use medium solder. You work your way down with solder, so you start with hard because it has the highest melting point, and then you would go medium, and then you can go soft and then extra soft. So I'm just going to cut a few pieces of solder to use here, and then I'm going to flux this guy. I burn the flux off before putting the solder in, because if you don't, it just jumps all around and it doesn't stay where you need it to stay. And then just like before, you really have to heat around the whole piece. I love this soldering board. It's from Rio because I can just easily rotate it while I'm heating my piece. And then once the piece is kind of evenly heated, I start to go around the outside because you want to draw the solder out so that it joins the two pieces. You want to go really slow and carefully so that your piece does not get too hot. And there you go, the solder's flowing. You probably can't see it, but you can literally see in person the solder just melting all along the edges of the bezel and melting it nicely together. So there it is now, and I'm going to put it into the pickle pot. And this is where these incredible Joyce Chen scissors that I mentioned earlier come into play. I have found that they can actually cut sterling silver sheet that's up to about 22 gauge. So you can actually just use these to cut around the back plate, so you have to do less sawing. And the closer that you can cut to the bezel, the better, assuming that you're going for a clean edge look, because then you have less sanding to do after the fact. So that looks pretty good, but there's still some roughness around the edges, so I'm going to give it a sand, and then we'll do a test fit, and then we will save the rest for another video. So here you have it, your completed bezel cup for your custom stone. Didn't sit in the pickle pot quite long enough, which is why you can still see the flux on the bottom, but that will come off in the rest of the cleaning process. And then we've got nice clean edges after the sanding, and the back is ready to attach either a ring band or a necklace chain to. The last thing that is really important to do is to test fit the stone into this bezel cup, because you want to make sure that it fits and you don't get too far without it working for you. It is really important. Use a piece of floss or 2 pieces of floss depending on how big your stone is, and put that stone, let's see mine's pretty snug, but the floss will enable me to be able to grab this stone out pretty quickly and easily, so that it doesn't get stuck. That's the worst, when you get a stuck stone into a beautifully new bezel cup. Thanks for joining me in my studio today. If you liked this video, it would help my channel grow so much if you like and subscribe. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments and I will get back to you. And also, if you have any other video ideas, I would love to hear from you.